In this world of anime, fan service is one of the constants, like death, taxes, and the inevitable author self-insert in light novel adaptations. Fortunately, unlike death and taxes, fan service can be safely ignored if the story for the show is good enough, though that pesky self-insert character might be a little harder to get rid of, as is the case in some of the anime I'm about to talk about. Yes, that's right, my friends. I, the one who detests fan service with a fiery passion, am about to tell you which anime I enjoy, despite the stupid fan service littered throughout their episodes. All thanks to the interesting, or at least intriguing, stories and characters. Coming in at number 5 is an anime I think at least a few of you know by reputation. Few are the anime that can create such jiggle physics and not be derided for it, and for this reason High School of the Dead isn't further up on the list. There is a lot of fan service in this show, and it's very often over the top and sexualized as we get images of badass women in thongs and half-torn clothes, covered in blood as they fight off the hordes of undead attacking their school. But herein lies the fascination I have with this show. Because watching women be badasses and sexy at the same time shows how much blatant absurd fun the creators had with this anime. And I can't help but be swept up in it and laugh along for the wild ride. Fan service can be stupid a lot of the time. And while High School of the Dead certainly has several instances of exactly that stupidity I hate so much, it also embraces the insanity, and even begins to tell a surprisingly deep story behind all the tits and gore. Contrary to what you might think, a lot of the characters in the show are actually pretty compelling, despite their ridiculous proportions, and the self-insert main character syndrome this anime suffers from. There's a psychological pressure that weighs down on each of these characters, and they all react to that tension in different ways. Kota reacts by living out his fantasy of ripping people apart with military hardware, able to fight back for once in his life as the rules of society fall to the wayside in favor of zombie-killing mayhem. He even manages to impress the girl by being the badass that was inside him all along, just like you'd see in an old school video game, which I can only imagine Kota grew up on and emulated to his detriment in the high school setting, but to his benefit in a zombie wasteland. Sexist though it may well be. Psycho, not one for adhering to those same sexist archetypes I just spoke about, embraces her inner warrior and goes on a tear through the zombies around her, and even flirts with the main character in a way that makes sense, rather than just because he's the author's self-insert. Psycho has a loneliness to her that she could never shake in her day-to-day life of a student. But in these trying situations, her inner self can be laid bare before the guy she clearly feels attracted to, though the suspension bridge effect probably has a little something to do with it too. In much the same way, Saya also gets the chance to take a good look inside of herself, and drop that display of disinterest she puts on for the people around her, and she truly begins to realize the importance of life and love in this world full of death. She gets her own arc in the show, and grows up to become more than the bitchy rich girl she starts out as. Though the show doesn't go much further after her arc, it's still impressive to see how many facets she displays than the one-note snooty Ojo-sama you'd expect in normal shows set in a high school setting. Speaking of normal, Rei is unfortunately the least interesting of the characters for me. But even she gets some character development, which is a good thing because she's pretty boring otherwise. And though she starts out with a boyfriend aside from the main guy, she quickly comes to realize she needs to be more of a badass and less of a princess needing to be rescued by the knight in shining armor, though she still does get saved a lot in the show. While there are more characters I could go on and on about, suffice to say, this anime is much deeper than an outward glance would tell you. And even if you watch the show to just enjoy the blood sport that is slaughtering zombies, and I know I do, you might miss some key moments of character that the anime sees fit to display between the boobs and butts it hits you with at every opportunity. And speaking of boobs and butts, the next show on my list is pretty much entirely devoted to that, since most of the cast are female. At 4th place in this gloriously stupid contest of needless fan service, Croswynd features a princess becoming a warrior woman beyond compare. And the transition from her initial form to the person she becomes at the end of the series is a stark contrast that actually works in a way that many stories often stumble toward trying to connect the two realistically. There's actual character development over the course of the series, as she first loses the hope inside of her going back to her peaceful, rich life, and goes full bore toward death every single day as she fights the dragons her unit was made to combat. This facet of her character goes on until she finally loses a fight in a big way, stranding herself on an island and coming into contact with the boy who would turn her life around, towards surviving and living another day in this hellish situation she finds herself in. Though the point in her character arc pivots on meeting a guy, which is incredibly cliche, and I'm sure some would say sexist, the fact that the show makes the event happen in a meaningful way, after she's been given into despair for so long, is actually emotionally charged in a way I didn't expect out of a series that prides itself on nearly naked girls fighting giant dragons and bloody displays of aerial superiority. Not to mention, Ange isn't the only one who changes throughout the course of the series, as the allies and enemies she makes within the core that become her prison get their own arcs as characters, which sometimes actually end in their deaths. This is an anime that isn't afraid to kill off its own characters to serve the narrative, though there is still a measure of plot armor in the form of a patently stupid frying pan for the maid character that serves Ange. That frying pan must give this maid resistance to piercing, bludgeoning, and fire damage. Really, what the fuck is this shit? Anyway, Ange as a character really fascinates me because she becomes so different and reacts to her situations in a realistic way, even considering all the unrealistic things she's exposed to. She has a lot of the same issues people in real life have, just dialed to 11 thanks to the life and death nature of her forced career path. The great thing about it is, she becomes good at dealing death, so it's interesting to think that this fits her as her calling better than the dream she has of owning a coffee shop with Tusk. The even better part is, she never really becomes a hero so much as an anti-hero, which is always more interesting than upholding the good of the world over a character's own satisfaction. And Ange certainly goes out of her way to do anything in order to survive, even if it means sacrificing others' happiness for her own, at least in some cases. And she gets that happiness for 3 whole days while taking Tusk down to Pound Town. You could teach the main character of the next anime in this list a few things about getting some of that, if you know what I mean. Slicing through the competition in 3rd place is the one, the only, Rakudai Kishi no Cavalry, or Chivalry of a Failed Knight. Now, you might be forgiven for writing this one off if you watched just the first episode, especially if you had the misfortune of watching Asterisk War at the same time. The stereotypical walking in on the girl changing is sadly present here. But the anime does do something a little different, with Stella actually creeping on Iki. Not to mention, Iki also takes off his clothes to be fair. Surprisingly, Rakudai manages to shrug off the typical fanservice conventions not much later on in the series, by actually establishing and blooming a romance between the two main leads, Iki and Stella. That's right, boys, this isn't your average battle harem anime like Asterisk War is. Because not only do these two cuties fall into a relationship at a rapid but well-paced rate, but all the other girls interested in Iki quickly come to realize that they have no chance, and acquiesce in a mature, demure manner. It's almost like these characters are actually reasonable adults, at least compared to most anime in the genre. Speaking of other girls though, each of them have their own stories that are, again, surprisingly compelling for being based on a light novel, with your stereotypical trappings that come with such adaptations. Ayase goes against her conscience because she values family over honor, and though she eventually ends up redeemed thanks to Iki being a badass, as your male protagonists usually do, her cold-hearted calculation to tip the scales in her favor, not once, but twice for the same match, warms the cockles of my dead heart. She actually plays intelligently to win, even if it means cheating. Even Shizuku has character building in this anime, little as there is. Though her clashes with Stella are obnoxious in the beginning of the series, she slowly becomes less of your typical lovey-dovey Emoto rival, and more of her own character as she goes up against one of the toughest girls in the school, the student council president Toka. Her fight is honestly pretty awesome, and though the conclusion was foregone because we need to have the toughest girl in school go up against Iki, the worst one, it was a lot closer than I thought it'd be. And the character development during the fight was impressive to behold, as it actually warmed me up to the Ice Queen more than I was expecting, given how much I hate her trope generally. Unfortunately for Rakudai, it doesn't go all the way with its romance like Croswynd does, even as Iki and Stella end up in a log cabin all alone, clustering together nearly naked for warmth. Stella, in a shamelessly brazen manner shared by many of the best girls in harems, like Marika from Nisukoi, is all about giving some of that diki as she strips even further. However, Iki gets cold feet, and decides he just can't let his hormones take over right now, at least until they're married. A fact that culminates in one of the best crowning moments for the first, and hopefully not last, season in anime I've seen in a very long time. After doing the impossible and defeating opponents while being traumatized and basically tortured by the government, he wins the tournament and drops a marriage proposal on Stella right at the end. Like the fucking stag he is. Iki isn't the only alpha male on this list though, and Drifters comes in second by virtue of both the sheer testosterone oozing out of every scene with Toyohisa, Oda Nobunaga, and even Yoichi, as they slaughter and generally be bad dudes in this Middle-earth-like world full of elves and dwarves, as well as the absurd fan service the anime still unfortunately carries with it in the form of Olmine. Now, a lot of you may be wondering why Drifters is on this list, when it doesn't have that much fan service in it compared to the ones that have preceded it. To those of you who dare question my authority on this matter, the reason is because this list is about anime with fan service I consider stupid, yet remains fun with the story and characters despite this unfortunate affliction, no matter how much or how little there is. Olmine is the brunt of fan service for this show, so much so that the defining feature of her scene in the opening is her boobs bouncing up and down in a stupid, ridiculous way. Though Yoichi gets some of his own form of fan service too, as his gender is much more ambiguous at the beginning, making for some racy scenes as members of this audience begin to question their sexuality. Drifters in general, on the other hand, is incredibly versatile despite its meathead main character. And even with Toyohisa, there is some depth there you might not see at first glance, as is the running theme you might have noticed with the anime I'm picking out to talk about. Toyohisa's intelligence on and off the battlefield, as well as his deep understanding of tactics, gives him an easier time against the opponents who so often underestimate his bloodthirst and ability to think on the fly. There is a reason Oda Nobunaga decided to step back and let Toyohisa lead, and why Nobunaga has such difficulty sometimes with reining Toyohisa in. A key point of the show is family, as each of the Japanese characters have a person in their lives they either look up to or feel proud of being next to. Toyohisa strives to live up to his family name, while Nobunaga pines after his son, and there is a genuine sadness when he's told his son died in the same full crusade Nobunaga himself pursued. Nobunaga is also a pretty evil dude, despite being one of the protagonists, a trait he shares with the rest of them actually. And his devilish genius is put toward making his allies' time on the battlefield easier, even if it means resorting to underhanded tactics. You might notice a trend here with the kind of characters I like if you've been paying attention. Those who use whatever means they have available to become the winners of whatever fight they're walking into. Yoichi, on the other hand, has an issue with his commander, and while their relationship is introduced early on in the show, there isn't much progress to it as far as the first season goes. But honestly, that's okay, because the more interesting point of Yoichi is how deadly and scarily eager he can be when struck by the thought of fleeing enemies. In fact, this intent and even desire to kill is a trait shared by all the people brought into this world, Ends and Drifters alike. On the subject of the two sides, battles between these two factions are very cool to watch unfold, and though the bulk of the show is the Drifters talking and trying to meet up, since there's more than just the Japanese main characters, I was still intrigued and entranced by the way these titans of men motivated first the elves, and then the dwarves to help them combat the evil empire started by Hitler himself. That's right, folks. Hitler formed another evil empire after being pulled from our dimension, and then he killed himself here too. Thank Christ that guy isn't around anymore. Am I right or am I right? Oh, wait. That reminds me. The antagonist bent on destroying this new fantasy world is none other than Jesus Christ himself, though it's more implied than outright said. And yes, there are other theories for who he is, but I'm putting my money on the Big J Man. Put all of this together and, baby, you got a stew going. But the awesomeness of the show doesn't stop there, because the blending of various characters pulled from throughout our history gives some interesting technological improvements in this medieval world, such as guns and explosives, which always make things better when going to war against an overwhelming number of foes. The dwarves even make the first shotgun of its kind, after a hearty meal of course. And what a perfect segue that is into the final anime on the top of this list. A show that uses fan service almost every episode, but still manages to be top tier show by wrestling that fan service, embracing it like a fond lover, and literally blowing the pants off everyone with the power of food! I'm sure you've guessed already, but I'm talking about Shokugeki no Soma, or Food Wars. And it's at the top of this list, above all the war and despair and cold-hearted killers, because no show I know of has this amount of dumb fan service in it, and still manages to keep me interested and invested in what could easily be a real world. Compared to the other shows on this list, I actually don't have much to say about Shokugeki no Soma, because it's all really well put together. The contests are interesting and varied, we get to see a lot of recipes that actually work, and the food always looks delicious. Even the fanservice scenes can be funny sometimes, like whenever Arena's father undresses every time he tastes something delicious. Soma himself is also a fun character to be around, and though he's often the airheaded idiot that irritates Arena so much, he's also got a drive and intelligence about him that keeps him creative, and pushing toward the goal his father set before him, as well as the goal he comes to on his own through his journeys. The other characters in the show also get a chance at character development, but contrary to the other shows in this list, Shokugeki no Soma offers that character evolution more than just one and done, because the characters in the show are constantly growing to become something better each time we get an episode devoted to them, and sometimes even on a side plot. Now that I think about it though, this might be because there's been 2 seasons of Shokugeki no Soma, compared to the 1 season of each of the previous entries in this list. Regardless, the girls are cute, the animation is stellar, the voice acting is consistently solid, and the plot and story move at a steady pace. And the fact that there's a tournament arc is excellent too, since tournament arcs really hype me up for an anime every time I watch a new episode. It might be an easy recipe for success, but plot lines that pit characters against each other for maximum entertainment as they hone their skills are always fascinating to me. The perfect anime for me, now that I think about it, would probably involve a world-spanning adventure, politics, and a tournament arc, at least at some points. So if you know anything like that, I'd really love to know about it. The last piece of Japanese media I've consumed like that was the Negama manga, which I highly recommend as a capstone on this video about stupid fanservice not ruining a great anime. Or manga in this case, since the anime for Negama isn't that great. But the manga has a lot of stupid fanservice in it every chapter, which is unfortunate. In the end, I hope you enjoyed my take on each of these anime, and I might even make an individual video on some of them, or all of them, one of these days if people feel interested enough in it. Because I really enjoyed all of them for far more reasons than I listed here. Of course, if you want to keep up to date on all the videos I do make sure you click that subscribe button, and then the little notification bell beside it to get those sweet notifications every time one of my videos goes up. And if you want a lot more of these videos, make sure you like them and share them with all your friends so more people can be exposed to my dumb thoughts about anime. The more people watch, the more content you get. Speaking of content, if you like my videos but want something a little less verbal to sink your teeth into, but you still want to keep that stunning wit and fabulous charm I imbue in everything I do, you could head to Dezu Daily to take a look at articles I write dealing with what anime I think you should be watching in whatever currently airing season it is. I also do an anime podcast you might find interesting if you can't stop listening to the dulcet tones of my devilishly attractive voice. And if you want to let me know what you thought about this video, leave a comment down below. You can even contact me directly at my Twitter, Tumblr, or Reddit account if you have something else to say. I always love discussion, and you won't hear me complain if you have something constructive or even insulting to say, because any interaction with fans is better than none in my opinion. Finally, whether you agree with what I say, or especially if you don't agree, I want you to remember to always enjoy the way you watch anime. Because as long as you're having fun watching it, that's all that really matters. I'll see you next time.